Welcome back. Today we're doing another deep dive, and we're focusing on, well, a really dramatic piece from 2 Chronicles, chapter 13 specifically.
That's right. It throws us right into the middle of a major war, doesn't it? Between the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel.
Exactly. The narrative presents it as a story about division, yes, but also confrontation and significantly what the text calls divine intervention.
It's a key moment after the kingdom split following Solomon. This chapter gives a very vivid, almost focused snapshot of one particular intense battle.
Okay, so let's get into the details from the source. Who are the leaders here? For Judah, we have King Abijah. He's Rehoboam's son, reigned 3 years in Jerusalem.
And his opponent is Jeroboam, king of Israel. The same Jeroboam from earlier, the official who rebelled against Rehoboam, Solomon's son.
Ah, right. And the text gives some context for that rebellion, doesn't it? Something about Rehoboam being young and indecisive.
Yes, young and indecisive and not strong enough to resist them. And it mentions Jeroboam was helped by worthless scoundrels. So the narrative definitely has a perspective on how this division started.
It certainly frames Jeroboam's side negatively from the get-go. And this long-standing tension, it finally boils over into open warfare between Abijah and Jeroboam here.
It does. And the numbers the source provides for the armies are, well, quite striking. Abijah for Judah marches out with 400,000 able fighting men.
400,000. I mean, even allowing for ancient figures, that's a massive army.
It is, but then immediately the text contrasts it with Jeroboam's force for Israel, 800,000 able troops.
Wow. Double the size. So Judah is outnumbered 2-1 right from the start. The narrative makes that very clear.
Absolutely. It sets up this David and Goliath kind of scenario, numerically speaking.
And this leads us to a really central part of the chapter. Before the fighting really begins, Abijah takes a stand on a mountain, Mount Zemaraim.
Yes, in the hill country of Ephraim. And he delivers this quite lengthy speech. It's not just trash talk. It seems absolutely key to how the source wants us to understand the whole conflict.
It really lays out Judah's whole perspective, or at least the perspective the chronicler wants to convey.
Exactly. And his core claim, the foundation of it all, is that the Lord, the God of Israel, has given the kingship of Israel to David and his descendants forever by a covenant of salt.
Covenant of salt. That phrase always jumps out. What's the significance of salt in that context, according to the text?
Well, in ancient Near Eastern contexts, salt signified permanence, incorruptibility. It preserves things, right?
Yeah.
So a covenant of salt implies an agreement that's meant to be absolutely binding, enduring, forever. It's a way of saying David's dynasty has this permanent divine right to rule.
Okay, so it's an unbreakable, divinely ordained promise. And building on that, Abijah accuses Jeroboam directly of, well, rebellion.
Plain and simple rebellion against his rightful master, linking it back to that initial split. He's framing Jeroboam as illegitimate from the very beginning.
And he takes it further, doesn't he? He says Israel isn't just fighting Judah, they're actually resisting the kingdom of the Lord.
Yes, because that kingdom is in the hands of David's descendants. So fighting Judah equals fighting God's established order, according to this speech. It elevates the stakes considerably.
That's a very bold claim. He then acknowledges Israel's huge army, that 800,000.
Right, he doesn't ignore their numbers.
But immediately pivots to criticize their religious practices. That seems to be the crux of his argument.
It really is. He points directly to the golden calves that Jeroboam made to be your gods. That's a direct hit against the religious centers Jeroboam set up in the north.
Calling them what are not gods. A very clear dismissal.
And he goes on to challenge their priesthood, too, asking them, didn't you drive out the Lord's priests, the sons of Aaron, the Levites?
And replace them with, well, anyone.
Essentially, yes. He describes their process. Whoever comes to consecrate himself with a young bull and 7 rams can become a priest. The text presents this as totally illegitimate compared to the hereditary Aaronic priesthood in Judah, priests of what are not gods, as you said.
Which then allows him to circle back and highlight Judah's faithfulness as he sees it.
Exactly. As for us, the Lord is our God, and we have not forsaken him. He emphasizes they do have the legitimate priests, Aaron's sons, the Levites, assisting them.
And he gets specific about their worship practices.
Yes, listing things like the morning and evening burnt offerings, the fragrant incense, setting out the special bread, lighting the lamps on the gold lampstand every evening. These are concrete acts of proper worship described in the law.
Demonstrating their adherence. And the direct contrast. We are observing the requirements of the Lord our God, but you have forsaken him. It's a stark dividing line drawn right there.
It really sets up the theological justification for the battle from Judah's perspective. This speech is doing a lot of narrative work.
And how does he conclude it? With a pretty strong declaration, right?
Very strong. God is with us. He is our leader. He even brings the priests into the battle plan, saying his priests, the legitimate ones, with their trumpets, will sound the battle cry against you.
So the trumpets aren't just symbolic, they're part of the arsenal, in a way.
In a theological sense, yes. And the final warning is blunt. Men of Israel, do not fight against the Lord, the God of your fathers, for you will not succeed. He's essentially saying, you're fighting God, you cannot win.
A powerful, theologically charged speech. But how does Jeroboam react, according to the text? Does he engage with the arguments?
Not at all, it seems. The narrative shifts immediately to tactics. Jeroboam had sent troops around to the rear. He's focused purely on military strategy, setting up an ambush.
A classic pincer movement. Attack from the front and the back simultaneously.
Exactly. And it seems Judah was caught by surprise. The text says they turned and saw that they were being attacked at both front and rear. A critical moment.
Surrounded, outnumbered. What's their reaction described as?
It's described sequentially. First, they cried out to the Lord, a direct appeal for divine help.
Then the priests step in.
Yes, then the priests blew their trumpets, just as Abijah had mentioned.
And finally,
The men of Judah raised the battle cry. So it's the sequence: cry to God, priestly action, collective human action.
and the narrative connects this directly to the turning point.
Explicitly. At the sound of their battle cry, God routed Jeroboam and all Israel before Abijah and Judah. The text leaves no room for doubt. It attributes the victory directly and immediately to God's intervention, triggered by Judah's cry and the priest's trumpets.
A complete reversal, so Israel flees.
Yes, the Israelites fled before Judah, and God delivered them into their hands. Again, note the language, God delivered them. It wasn't just Judah's military skill in that moment. It's framed as divine action.
And the aftermath described as devastating for Israel.
Truly devastating. Abijah and his forces inflicted heavy losses. The number given is staggering. 500,000 casualties among Israel's able men.
500,000 men out of the 800,000 they supposedly started with. What's an enormous figure.
It is. Whether taken literally or as hyperbole, the narrative intent is clear: to show an utterly crushing defeat for Israel, emphasizing the scale of the divine judgment described.
And the text summarizes the outcome very directly.
It does. The men of Israel were subdued on that occasion, and the men of Judah were victorious because they relied on the Lord, the God of their fathers. It couldn't be more explicit in linking reliance on God to victory.
Beyond just the immediate battle, did Abijah gain ground?
Yes, the text says he pursued Jeroboam and captured several towns: Bethel, Jeshanah, and Ephron, with their surrounding villages.
Bethel stands out there, doesn't it? Wasn't that one of Jeroboam's main religious sites?
Exactly. Bethel was where one of the golden calves was set up. So capturing Bethel wasn't just a military gain. It was symbolically significant within the narrative, striking at the heart of the religious practice Abijah condemned in his speech.
And what about Jeroboam himself? What does the source say happened to him?
His end is recorded quite starkly. He did not regain power during the time of Abijah, and then, quite simply, and the Lord struck him down and he died.
Wow. Presented as direct divine punishment, aligning with Abijah's warning.
Precisely. Within the logic of this narrative, it's the final confirmation of the consequences of opposing the divine will, as the text defines it.
And Abijah, in contrast,
He grew in strength. The text also adds details about his large family: 14 wives, 22 sons, 16 daughters.
which in these kinds of ancient accounts often symbolizes success, prosperity, maybe divine blessing after a victory like this.
That's generally how such details function, yes. Indicators of a thriving, successful reign, particularly contrasted with Jeroboam's fate.
And the chapter wraps up by pointing to other sources.
Right, the standard formula. Other events of his reign, what he did and what he said, are written in the annotations of the prophet Iddo. It suggests more records existed, but highlights this battle as the defining event the chronicler chose to elaborate on.
Okay, so let's step back and think about what this deep dive into 2 Chronicles 13 really shows us based on the source material itself. It paints a really clear contrast.
A very stark contrast. On one side, you have Israel under Jeroboam, presented as relying on superior numbers, military tactics like the ambush, but crucially engaging in religious practices, the calves, the non-Levitical priests that the narrative condemns as illegitimate and forsaking God.
And on the other side, Judah under Abijah, Outnumbered, yes, but presented as holding to the correct worship, the Aaronic priests, the prescribed rituals, and, most importantly, their victory is explicitly tied to their reliance on the Lord.
The narrative structure emphasizes this cause and effect. The cry to God, the trumpets, the battle, these aren't just incidental details. They're presented as the immediate precursors, the triggers for God routing the enemy. It's direct divine intervention in response to faithfulness and desperation.
That covenant of salt idea Abujah used wasn't just rhetoric either. It was fundamental to his claim of legitimacy for David's line, providing the theological bedrock for Judah's entire stance in this conflict, as presented here.
Absolutely. And those huge numbers for the armies and casualties.
Mhm.
Within the narrative, they serve to magnify the miracle, to underscore the scale of God's intervention, the devastating consequences of being on the wrong side of that divine will.
And Jeroboam's end being struck down by the Lord acts as the final grim punctuation mark within this narrative's perspective.
It completes the picture. Faithfulness, as defined by the text, leads to victory and strength. Unfaithfulness and rebellion lead to defeat and divine judgment. It's a very clear moral and theological framework being presented.
Right. So, thinking about this specific account, here's something for you, the listener, to maybe reflect on. This chapter presents history, or at least this particular event, with a very clear cause and effect tied to religious faithfulness and reliance on divine power. How does encountering a narrative framed so explicitly in those terms make you think about the complex relationship between faith, assertions of power, and the actual outcomes of conflicts, both then and maybe even now?
It certainly gives us a powerful window into how at least one ancient community understood those connections and constructed their history around them. A very specific, faith-driven interpretation of events.